Jane Low, and I'm at SuperAI here in Singapore. And with me today, I'm very pleased and very privileged to have Will, who is with AI, all the way from San Francisco. So thank you so much for joining us in this podcast to talk about the latest developments in voice AI.
Yeah, thanks so much. Super excited to be here and always love talking about voice AI.
Oh, great. Cool. Yeah, so when it comes to voice AI, I think it's a step further up from, the chatbots that we are familiar with. So it's really taking a step further from conversational text to voice, right? So there's a lot of exciting developments in that area. So tell us what you are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, Phonely we think is the world's easiest platform for building a voice agent that, answers your phone and does what you need it to do without having to learn how to code, without having to learn how to prompt engineer. It's basically, you set it up, you build conversational flows, and that answers your phone, but we also build a lot of real-time integrations into different softwares like, Calendly or, CRMs or other things that might need to have the voice AI agent interacting with. We kind of create that human to voice to computer interface that allows people to build voice agents that can scale to one call to 1 million.
Right. So I guess one of the challenges how you connect the infrastructure challenge in connecting to all these different other applications as well, right?
Yeah.
But before we come into that, right, I just want to touch very briefly on some of the points that you talked about at your presentation, which is latency. So that's one challenge you need to solve, right? So when we are talking, it's different from typing. You expect half a second latency that's acceptable, but with voice, it's more like you need to make it human-like, and that's why latency is such an important factor to solve.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think we started talking about that in the beginning where this is different from chat in that chat is much easier in some sense because, you have a defined endpoint and you saying, okay, I'm hitting enter and then I'm getting the response back. But with voice, there's all these different nuances that I think makes it such an exciting problem to work on from an engineering standpoint because we're not just dealing with large language models, we're not just building software, but we're also interacting and understanding how people want to communicate. And that itself is just like a fascinating and really fun problem to work on and to try to solve. And a lot of that comes into what I think is like, from a just conversational standpoint, which is latency and then endpointing and interruptions. And so having a natural conversation involves you understanding when it's okay to inject into the conversation, say, right, okay, and me understanding that I shouldn't stop talking because you're agreeing with my conversation. And it also requires you to understand when I'm done talking, which is now going to be stuck in your head for the rest of this podcast. I say that to people and they don't know how to have a conversation after that. But it's really true. And so like figuring out how to do that from a computer level is a really fun and really challenging problem to work on, which gets me excited.
Right. So tell us about some of these, share with us some of the exciting stories that you have in trying to solve this problem.
Yeah, gosh. So voice AI is so funny. We have a whole Slack channel with me and like a few other voice AI builders that is just like funny fails that like happens during voice AI where you'll have like some time where, you're doing testing and then the AI just like pronounces something like crazy wrong and it's just comical how wrong it's pronounced or it'll like go off on a tangent and be like, wee, and it just like trail off like that. And we have all of those. And then we have the other side of it, which is like voice AI agents interacting with the public, which is like another funny, thing where we'll have sometimes, a lot of times customers don't realize they're talking to an AI.
No, they don't.
And then they realize, and then they feel like, wait a second, there's this whole like moment.
Such an idiot kind of thing, right?
But a lot of times they're kind of like I think one of my favorite ones was when somebody was like, oh, I'm so sorry, I thought you were a robot. And it's like, I'm an AI. And the guy's like, dang it. He was like, what just happened? It's like his brain broke and he didn't, but he's like, I still want to do the thing. So he kept interacting with it like a person. So I thought that was just like a really fun and kind of cool example. So there's all those stories that happen as you try to figure out how to make computers talk like people.
How do you solve for these emotional nuances, right? To capture that and, when we have a conversation right now, right?
Yeah.
We know when to laugh or stop laughing, right?
Yeah.
How can you capture that in a voice AI? How difficult is it?
I think the last mile of voice AI is going to be a problem that we work on for years and years and years to have that fluid, like I'm supposed to be laughing, you're supposed to be laughing type of conversation. But I think from where we focus, which is like from a business perspective, we have most of the tools in place for what we need, where it's you're on the phone because you're trying to accomplish something, and we now have the tools with AI to make that thing that you're trying to accomplish possible.
Yeah.
So if it's scheduling an appointment, we know how to build that out and configure the models in the right way to make that happen, and we know how to make it happen in real time using a lot of smart orchestration and software optimization to lower the latency.
Right, so it's really execution, kind of like black and white execution steps, right? There's no nuances at the moment.
I wish. I feel like there's a lot of nuances. I think that a lot of the exciting thing about building in voice AI is that this is this whole different domain. And so what I say all the time is I'm like, we're at e-commerce was in the 90s, where we just realized we could put books on the internet, and that was like a crazy concept. We're in the same place with voice AI, but now what our customers are starting to realize is that we can optimize for conversion in ways that we've never been able to before. So if we get $1,400 by somebody booking an appointment with us, if we're like a orthodontics office, for example, and that's a very high ticket, we want to actually be able to optimize for that conversion over the phone call to make sure that if this person is calling in, that they're getting scheduled in and they're not going to go somewhere else, because we make a significant amount of money. And so I think it's really exciting now that we're kind of getting some of the benchmarks there of being able to build on voice, there's all this software that can be built on top to optimize for whatever objective that might be, whether it's conversion or just customer experience. All of that stuff can be worked on, and I think that that's the exciting part.
How do you ensure accuracy? So, for example, scheduling the appointment, the right person's, calendar, the right time, the right location.
It's a hard problem, and it's something that in the beginning, like, we had no idea how to do it other than like put it in the prompt and like say the prompt. Never ever for any reason whatsoever, make this up. And that was like kind of where we started. And then what we realized was that what we could do is if we broke down the prompt into a series of different steps and stages, and we kind of put it on this canvas where we didn't let the model know about all the things. We just let it know what it needed to do at that stage before it could move on to the next stage. Then what we could do is we could make sure that it could accomplish that step, and then we could kind of create this like branching flow architecture to map out the conversation. And so it's basically like we've kind of created this conversational canvas where you can place in real time booking calendar links. You can also place conversational blocks so that you can recreate what a person might be doing in a scripting software over the phone.
Right. So it's like breaking down the prompt into mini steps, mini goals.
Exactly. So you break it down into these little different ones, and then we do a lot of smart prompt engineering. We've done fine tuning. There's a lot more that's going behind the scenes, but that's like one of the biggest like things that we learned was that is the best way to solve this problem.
So another challenge, obviously, which we touched very lightly earlier, is linking all the different applications together, right?
Yes.
So tell us about that.
It's not an easy problem, right? It's a hard problem for a number of different reasons. Like, reason number one is, you need to go through read developer documentation, which is never fun. I don't recommend anybody doing that. But you have to read through docs to like import the API to connect all the tools and do that. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is that you need to make sure that this conversation is happening accurately, like this step at the flow is happening at the point it should happen, which is a problem that we've kind of solved, but I think for a lot of other builders, that's a hard part, is like making sure it calls the function at the right stage of the conversation to book the appointment. That's an important thing. And then the other thing is transcription. So when you're scheduling an appointment, you need to gather their name and their email, and transcription models were not trained on, they were trained on some, but they were not trained on all the names and email combinations out there. And so a lot of times what we see is that they struggle with this information to capture it and then make it accurate. And if you're using a name or an email as an identifier to schedule that appointment, you need to make sure that it's 100% correct, because otherwise you don't schedule the appointment, and there's just like weird confusion stage that you get to. And so I think that all of those problems are the like little last mile things that become very, very important when you want to have real-time integrations in voice AI.
So tell us about how, the length of time that it took for you guys to go from, conception to actually testing to deploying it.
Yeah. So it's been a long, like, rocky, road, I think, as any startup is, where it's like you first have this idea. I started working on this like 2 years ago, and I said, this should happen. You should be able to answer your phones with AI, right? And so, we were back working like before streaming was out, which streaming is like, the models could like output stuff quickly before function calling even existed. So we started working on this really, really early days. And a lot of the time there, it was like we were just trying to solve problems that nobody had ever solved before. And I think we still do that to a different extent of like connecting these different models. And so I remember the first time that like we got it up and running and we got like 4-second latency of response time, we were ecstatic because like, wait, it only took 4 seconds for the model to respond. And then we went from like 4 seconds down to like 2 seconds, and then 2 seconds to 1.5, and then 1.5 to 1, and then we've been able to like go below that. But a lot of it was, there was this whole big discovery process of figuring out not only like how do we do this from a technical perspective, but how do we do this from a business perspective? Like how does the business want to interact with it? Which is hard when there's not like, I can't Google the question to this, like how do I reduce latency for my voice AI agent? It doesn't exist. Like nobody has done that, you know? And so it's been really fun and really hard to work on like, okay, well, how do we fix this problem with this large language model? How do we do that? And it's just been this like giant like whack-a-mole of like a problem comes up and we have just gotten really good at like whacking different ones down.
Right, you talk about emotional nuances, capturing it properly is probably one of the very last big challenge in voice AI, right? So looking ahead, is that something that you aim to solve, or where do you see voice AI going?
Yeah, so I'm very bullish on voice AI as a whole. I think that there's so many exciting things that can be built on top of it, and I think that it's going to probably redefine the way that we interact with a lot of software. Because if you think about like the world that we're at today, we're at this world of people create software. You have to learn how to use the software in order to interact with the thing that you want to have it happen, right? But what if there was this world out there where you could just say, hey, I'm trying to get this thing done, like go do it for me, right? And I think that those like type of applications are very exciting for voice AI. And I think that the conversational piece of, does it need to laugh? Does it need to sing? Yes, that's cool, that's handy. But I think from a business perspective, I would be very happy if I could never have to learn another software again and just have an AI agent that I could say, hey, I want to do this, or hey, I want to do that. And it would just translate what it needed to do to make that happen and kind of like show me how it did it.
So in terms of, taking a step back and thinking, okay, we did a good job, right?
Yeah.
Is it about saying, okay, we fool the human beings or we fool the AI, we pass the Turing test, right?
Yeah.
So the human can't tell the difference whether they are talking to a voice AI or, to another human.
Yeah.
In terms of, what makes it work from your perspective? What makes it a success?
Yeah. So from my perspective, it's all about what the customer wants. So if the customer is looking to qualify a customer and we did a successful job on that they didn't hang up, then that's a win for me. I always get excited when people are like, they're like, oh, thank you so much for all the help that you did. And I was like, that was not a person, that was an AI, right? But they didn't know the difference. So that makes me excited. But I think that really where we're driven is saying like, how can we work with our customers to optimize for their conversational goals and just basically connect the dots to make that happen.
So if a new customer comes to you, say a new, dentist or doctor's clinic in Singapore comes to you, you probably have to sort of train the voice AI to recognize the local, I guess, accent, or sometimes there's, Chinese dialect or Malay to adapt your solution to the local culture, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So that I will just like put a couple caveats on there. So transcription models and voice models are really good in English. They're okay in other languages, and so that is definitely like a big point of contention. Is like training better transcription models on more languages. I think it's something that hopefully in the next couple years we continue to build out better architecture. And if you look at the graphs, it's like English, the common languages are really good. But when we start getting into accents and stuff like that, training those models and building that out is something that I think is going to require a lot of work in order to get it done. So if we're working with a office in Singapore, it may require like a scope of work that is outsized what that business may actually get benefit from.
Right.
But I think that if we think about it as like over the next couple years, it's going to make sense where there is a model available that's already trained on a specific dialect that we can just pull in and then use. So I think that's where we're seeing like a lot of the bottleneck is like actually on the transcription side.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So really exciting. A lot of questions I have. One final question, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to voice AI, it's a favorite question of mine, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that we will be able to have a combination of voice AI and perhaps a visual clone of myself doing a podcast in the future with you?
Yeah, I think we're getting pretty close to that. The question that I always have in my mind is, will people care that it's human or AI?
What do you think?
I think, unfortunately, probably not. But I'll put a caveat on that. I think that a lot of what we're doing in life is we're just living a human experience with other people. And so I think that we will always have respect for certain individuals, and we will always be interested in following an individual, not necessarily because of the content, but because of who we aspire to be as a person. And so I think that from a lot, there's a reason why we watch sports. It's not a productive thing to do, but we admire the people that are playing, and it seems fun to watch, and we enjoy that, right? And so I think that a lot of what human experience is, we think it's all focused on growth and business and blah blah blah. But I think a lot of it's just we're just humans and we're just experiencing life. And I think that we will always admire other people experiencing lives in ways that we would want to do. So I think that podcasts will still exist. I think that, AI-generated podcasts will exist, but they'll probably be two separate things where you're continuing to support a person rather than the idea of a podcast.
Right. And I guess the other question is whether we can tell the difference in the future, right?
Yeah.
So possibly maybe not.
Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah. And at that point, we don't care anymore.
I don't know. I would think that I would still care. That would be my 2 cents. Is I would still care because I'd be rooting for the person, and I don't know. I feel like you get less respect if it's oh, this is just AI generated. You're okay, whatever. But if it's oh, a person really was able to there's something beautiful about saying a well said sentence, because it's so hard for people to get that out. Myself and I'm assuming everyone to communicate a thought really well is a hard thing and a beautiful thing, and I think that I'm excited for that to continue to happen with humans.
Oh, right. Hopefully. So
Yeah.
maybe next year, if you are in Singapore, we have this podcast again
There you
in
go.
person.
Yeah.
Or
AIs.
Or AI. Right.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Will, for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.